A small, quiet grocery store becomes the target of a group of racist criminals who believe the elderly black owner is an easy victim. They smash shelves, terrorize customers, and leave him humiliated, thinking they've won. But what they don't know is that this man has seen war, has survived battles that would break most men. And when they push him too far, they awaken a force they never could have imagined. What starts as mindless destruction will turn into a lesson they will never forget. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. Chapter 1. The shopkeeper's last warning. The fluorescent lights flickered lazily, casting a dim glow over the small grocery store. The air was thick with the scent of aging wooden shelves, fresh produce and warm bread, a comforting presence in the quiet night. John Carter, the owner, sat behind the counter, flipping through the pages of an old book. His hands, strong despite the years, rested on the worn wood, scarred with the stories of a past most had forgotten. He was 70 now, his hair silver, his posture straight as ever. He had fought in wars, seen things that never left him. But this was his peace, his place, a small shop in the heart of his community. Outside, the neon Carter's Market sign buzzed softly, illuminating the empty streets. This neighborhood had changed over the years, some for better, some for worse. Lately, worse had been winning. John sighed, glancing toward the clock, almost closing time. And then the bell above the door chimed. The first mistake. 3 men stepped inside. Their faces were young, twisted with the kind of arrogance that only came from never being told no. Their leader, a man named Vance, smirked as he strutted in, his boots heavy against the old floorboards. His crew, 2 others, one lanky, one built like a wall, flanked him, their hands stuffed into their hoodies. John didn't flinch. He had seen their type before. Trouble. You're cutting it close, son, John said, his voice calm. Closing in 5. Vance chuckled, running a hand over the shelves. Yeah? Thought we'd stop by, check out the place, show some appreciation. His fingers trailed over a row of canned goods before he casually knocked them to the floor. The clattering echoed through the small store. John's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Vance grinned. Oops. They thought he was weak, the big one, Diesel laughed. He reached for a crate of apples and shoved it off the counter. Man, this place is a dump, the lanky one, Kyle muttered, stepping toward the fridge. He grabbed a bottle of soda, twisted the cap off, and took a swig. John exhaled slowly. Put that back, he said. Kyle raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? Or what, old man? John stood up, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time, the gang noticed something. Despite his age, his movements were sharp, his posture disciplined, his hands steady. John stepped around the counter, his boots clicking against the floor. You got a name? He asked, looking straight at Vance. Vance smirked. Yeah. What, you want to write me a thank you card? John's eyes were unreadable. No, I just like to know the names of men who make the worst mistake of their lives. Kyle scoffed. You hearing this, dude? But Diesel hesitated. Something about the old man's presence, his calmness, set off an instinct he didn't even know he had. The warning. John didn't look at the mess they had made. He didn't look at the knocked-over shelves, the spilled drinks, the broken produce. He looked at them. You got one chance, he said, voice low. Walk out that door right now and you'll wake up tomorrow in one piece. Kyle laughed. Man, shut the hell up. And then he shoved John. A hard push, meant to send an old man stumbling. But John didn't stumble, didn't flinch, didn't even move. Kyle's smirk faded. John stared at him. And in that moment, Vance realized something. They had just made a mistake. The first hit, Vance wasn't about to back down in front of his crew. He lunged, a wild, arrogant swing aiming for John's jaw. He never saw the counter coming. John sidestepped with inhuman speed, grabbing Vance's wrist, using his own momentum against him. Crack! Vance slammed face first into the counter, his nose shattering on impact. He collapsed, groaning, blood dripping onto the floor. Diesel blinked. Kyle's eyes went wide. What the... John turned to them. His voice was quiet. Last chance. The chaos erupts. Kyle panicked. He reached for his pocket, maybe for a knife, maybe for something worse, but John was already there. A sharp twist. Kyle's wrist snapped before he could grab anything. He screamed, stumbling backward, crashing into a shelf. Diesel, the biggest of them, charged. John let him come. Let him think he had the upper hand, then he moved. A sidestep, a hard elbow to the gut. Diesel doubled over. John grabbed the back of his hoodie, and with one smooth motion, he threw the 250-pound man straight into the front display. Glass shattered, shelves collapsed. Diesel groaned, buried under broken wood and crushed products. The aftermath. Silence. Kyle whimpered, clutching his broken wrist. Diesel groaned, barely conscious. Vance, his face covered in blood, wiped his nose with a shaking hand. John crouched beside him. "You come back here again," he said, voice steady. "And next time, you won't walk out." Vance's breaths were shaky. John stood up, stepping over him like he didn't matter. And then, calmly, like nothing had happened, he grabbed a broom and started cleaning. Outside, a dark car watched, parked across the street, just beyond the neon glow of the Carter's Market sign, a black sedan, tinted windows, engine running, watching. And inside, someone smiled, because tonight wasn't over, not even close. Chapter 2. The men who don't forgive the air outside was thick with humidity, the heat clinging to the pavement like an invisible fog. The neon sign of Carter's Market flickered, casting a weak glow on the quiet street. But John Carter wasn't thinking about the heat. He stood behind the counter, calmly sweeping the broken glass into a pile, the soft scrape of the bristles against the tile the only sound in the store. His muscles ached, not from age, but from restraint. He had let those boys walk out of his shop alive, and now he wondered if that had been a mistake. The black sedan. Across the street, the black sedan remained parked in the shadows. Inside, two men sat in silence, watching. One of them, sitting in the driver's seat, was tall, thin, with eyes sharp as knives. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel in a slow, methodical rhythm. The man in the passenger seat was built like a wrecking ball, broad shoulders, tattooed arms, the kind of man who never had to introduce himself in a fight. They had watched everything, watched as Vance and his crew had stormed the old man's shop, ready to tear it apart. Watched as he, the supposed frail old man, had taken them apart like a machine built for war. The thin man smirked. "He's not what I expected." The tattooed man cracked his knuckles. "No, he's worse." The driver reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a sleek black pistol. The steel gleamed under the streetlight. "We'll handle it," he murmured. Tonight, Vance's humiliation. Vance sat in the back of another car, pressing a wad of tissues to his broken nose. His whole face throbbed. His breathing came in sharp, ragged gasps. He had never been beaten like that before, never humiliated like that before. The worst part, he couldn't even fight back. The old man had played with them, like they weren't even a threat. Vance's fingers curled into fists. His father was going to kill him when he found out what had happened. But maybe he wouldn't have to tell him. Maybe he could fix this before word got out. He looked at his crew. Diesel, his face bruised and swollen, sat silently, arms crossed. Kyle was still holding his wrist, the makeshift bandages doing little to ease his pain. Vance leaned forward, his voice low, seething. "We go back. Tonight." Diesel shifted uncomfortably. "Man, I don't know," he muttered. "That dude ain't normal." Kyle scoffed, his voice shaking. He snapped my wrist like it was nothing, like he wasn't even trying. Vance gritted his teeth. "We ain't running, not from some old man." Diesel hesitated. "Then we bring more guys." Vance smirked, his lips still bleeding. "Yeah, we bring everyone." The storm approaches. John Carter had almost finished sweeping when he felt it, a shift in the air, a stillness that wasn't natural. The shop was closed now, the front doors locked, the lights dimmed. But something was wrong. He turned toward the window and saw them, a group of men standing across the street. More than before, a lot more. 8, maybe 10. John sighed, setting the broom down. So they were stupid enough to come back. Fine. He reached beneath the counter, felt the familiar cold steel of the Colt 1911 tucked away in a hidden compartment. He had hoped he wouldn't need it, but some men only understood one language, and tonight he would speak it fluently. The first attack. The first bottle hit the window. Glass shattered, spilling onto the floor like ice. John exhaled, slowly, controlled. Then came the second bottle. Fire erupted, spreading across the pavement outside. A Molotov. They weren't just here to fight, they were here to burn him down. John didn't hesitate. He reached for the light switch and killed the power. Inside the store, the lights flickered off, plunging the room into darkness. Outside, the gang hesitated. The flickering firelight from the Molotov cast twisted shadows across the street. Vance grinned, stepping forward. "All right, old man," he called out. "No more games. Come out, take your beating, and maybe we won't kill you." Silence. Then, the front door creaked open. The wrong house to rob John stepped outside, his silhouette barely visible against the burning street. He wasn't holding a gun, not yet. His hands were at his sides, relaxed, too relaxed. Vance took another step forward, emboldened. "You listening, old man? This is your last chance to—" John spoke, quiet, steady. "You should have taken my warning." And then he moved. The first hit. John closed the distance between him and the first man before the idiot could react. A single step, a single strike. A knee to the gut, deep, controlled, brutal. The thug collapsed, choking, his lungs refusing to take in air. The second man swung wildly, a knife flashing in the firelight. John sidestepped. The blade missed him by an inch. Then, with inhuman speed, he grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting it so hard the bones shattered. The man screamed, falling to the ground, the knife clattering onto the pavement. 2 down. The war begins. Vance panicked. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They had the numbers, they had the weapons, but John had something they didn't. Experience. The third man lunged. John caught his arm, snapped it backward at the elbow. The fourth swung a crowbar. John dodged, drove a brutal fist into his ribs, sent him gasping to the pavement. The fifth ran. Smart, but not fast enough. John grabbed a loose brick from the ground and threw it. It hit the runner square in the back of the head. The thug collapsed unconscious. Vance staggered back. It had taken less than 30 seconds, and John had destroyed 5 men. The final warning. John turned to Vance, the last one standing, the leader, the coward. Vance stumbled back, reaching for something in his jacket. John was faster. His Colt 1911 was already in his hand, the barrel aimed right between Vance's eyes. The younger man froze. John took a step closer. "You're done," he said quietly. Vance swallowed. You wouldn't shoot an unarmed man." John smirked. "Try me." Vance didn't. Instead, he turned and ran, and John let him. But inside the black sedan, the 2 men watching didn't leave. The thin man in the driver's seat chuckled. "Well," he murmured, "this just got interesting." And as John Carter holstered his gun, as he watched the last thug flee into the night, he had the sinking feeling that tonight had only been the beginning. Chapter 3. The Men in the Black Sedan. The silence that followed was thick, unnatural. John Carter stood in the middle of the street, his breath controlled, his heartbeat steady. Around him, the defeated men groaned, some unconscious, others too broken to move. The scent of burning alcohol from the Molotov still lingered in the air, mixing with the stench of fear. But John's focus had shifted, not to the men he had put down, not even to Vance, who had disappeared into the night like a scared child. No, his eyes were locked on the black sedan that hadn't moved since the fight began. It had been parked across the street, hidden in the shadows, watching. John didn't like being watched, and whoever was inside that car, they weren't just bystanders. The 2 men who didn't leave inside the vehicle, the thin man tapped a rhythm against the steering wheel, amused. The larger man beside him was less entertained. "He put 5 of them down in seconds," he muttered, adjusting the grip on his pistol. The thin man smirked. "He's better than I expected." The larger man didn't reply. He was already reaching for the door handle. The approach. John Carter's fingers twitched, itching toward his Colt as he watched the doors of the black sedan swing open. Two men stepped out, not punks like Vance and his crew. These men moved differently, controlled, trained. John saw it immediately, the way their eyes scanned the area, the way they didn't panic, didn't hesitate. They weren't here for trouble, at least not the kind Vance had brought. The thin man stepped forward, hands in his pockets, casual, like this was just another night in the city. The larger man stayed back, his expression unreadable, his stance ready. John squared his shoulders, his grip steady on the handle of his pistol. He didn't say anything. He just waited. The man who spoke first. The thin man stopped a few feet away, tilting his head as he studied John. Then he smiled. That was impressive. John didn't reply. The thin man chuckled. You don't talk much, do you? Still, silence. The thin man sighed, glancing down at the broken men scattered across the pavement. I figured you were tough. But this, he gestured toward the unconscious bodies, this is something else. John finally spoke. You following me? The thin man smirked. In a way. John's grip on his gun tightened. The thin man saw it and raised his hands in mock surrender. Easy, old man. We're not here for a fight. John didn't relax. The thin man nodded, as if expecting that. My name's Royce, he said, then nodded toward the silent brute behind him. That's Morgan. Morgan didn't speak. Royce sighed. So you don't care, do you? John said nothing. Royce exhaled. Fine, I'll get to the point. He gestured to the wreckage around them. You just humiliated the son of a very important man. John's jaw clenched. Vance, he muttered. Royce smirked. So you do know who he is? John narrowed his eyes. Not really, he admitted, but I know his type. Royce chuckled. Then you also know that men like his father don't let things like this slide. John exhaled through his nose. He had a feeling this wasn't over. Now he was sure of it. The father in the shadows. Royce leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Vance's father is Donovan Blackwell. John didn't react, but inside, something clicked. Blackwell. He had heard that name before. A wealthy businessman on paper, a crime lord in reality. Drugs, weapons, extortion. Blackwell had his hands in everything, and now John had just beaten his son to a pulp. Royce sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I don't know what your deal is. I don't know why an ex-Marine is running a grocery store in the middle of nowhere, but I do know one thing. His smirk faded. Blackwell doesn't forgive. John tilted his head. And you? Royce shrugged. I'm not your enemy. I'm just here to deliver a message. John crossed his arms. Go on. Royce exhaled. Leave town. Tonight. John didn't blink. Royce's smirk returned. That's what I thought. He took a step back, nodding toward Morgan. Well, we did our job. Whether or not you listen, he glanced at the broken men again, is your problem. Morgan turned first, walking back toward the sedan. Royce lingered for just a second longer. Then he smiled. You're a tough old bastard. John's stare was ice cold. Royce chuckled. Good luck. Then, without another word, he climbed into the sedan. The engine rumbled to life, and in the next second, they were gone. The decision. John stood there for a long time, the only sound left being the distant hum of the city. His fingers flexed over his Colt. He knew what was coming, knew what Blackwell was capable of, knew that leaving town might actually be the smart thing to do. But John Carter had never been smart. He had spent his whole life running toward danger, and he wasn't about to run now. So instead, he locked the store, went upstairs, sat down in front of an old, dust-covered metal locker. And when he opened it, the ghosts of his past stared back at him. A combat knife, an M1911 pistol, a scoped rifle, memories of war, memories of the man he used to be, the man he had buried long ago. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to dig him back up. Chapter 4. Blackwell's Move. The night stretched on, long and unforgiving. John Carter sat in his small apartment above the grocery store, the contents of the old metal locker spread out before him. His fingers ran over the cold steel of the M1911 pistol, its weight familiar, its presence heavy with old ghosts. He had spent years trying to forget, trying to live as a civilian, trying to be a man who simply ran a grocery store. But Blackwell had forced his hand, and now the man John Carter used to be, the man who had killed for his country, the man who had survived wars most couldn't even imagine, was coming back. And when he did, hell would follow. The storm before the fire. The black sedan hadn't returned, but John knew better than to think this was over. He cleaned his M1911, loading it with the efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. The combat knife was next, its blade sharp, gleaming under the dim light. Finally, he lifted the scoped M14 rifle, its barrel cool against his fingertips. He had buried this weapon, swearing he would never use it again. But some men, some monsters, only understood one language, and John Carter still spoke it fluently. A noise broke the silence. Distant at first, then louder, engines, multiple. He placed the rifle down, stepping toward the window, and what he saw made his stomach tighten. 3 black SUVs coming straight for the store. This was it. Blackwell wasn't sending messages anymore. Now he was sending his soldiers. The first shot. The SUVs pulled up outside, their engines rumbling like caged beasts. Doors opened, men poured out. Not punks like Vance and his crew. These were professionals, armed, dressed in black tactical gear, moving with the precision of trained operatives. John counted at least 10. Then, the first gunshot rang out. A bullet slammed into the storefront, shattering the glass. John didn't move, didn't panic. He expected this, planned for this. He reached down, grabbing the M14 rifle, steadying it against the windowsill. A deep breath, a slow exhale. Then, he fired. The first man went down immediately, his body dropping like a lifeless puppet. Chaos erupted. The remaining soldiers scattered, some taking cover behind the SUVs, others aiming their weapons toward the window. John fired again. Another man collapsed, his rifle falling from his hands. A spray of bullets ripped through the walls, punching holes in the wooden structure. John ducked, reloading. He had the high ground. He had the advantage, but he couldn't stay here forever. Time to move. The man in charge. Outside, Royce stepped out of the SUV, his usual smirk absent. He didn't look impressed, he looked curious, as if John Carter had just become something far more interesting than he expected. He turned to the remaining men. Flank the building, smoke him out. 2 men rushed toward the back entrance. 2 more moved toward the side alley. Royce watched, waited. He wanted to see how Carter responded, because this was just the beginning. The ambush in the alley. John Carter moved fast, sliding down the back stairs, his knife in one hand, pistol in the other. He knew they were coming. He knew how they thought, and they had no idea what kind of man they were hunting. The first mercenary rounded the corner, his rifle raised. John struck before he could react. The knife drove deep into his throat, silencing him instantly. The second man barely had time to scream before John fired, the bullet hitting him center mass. 2 down, 8 left. The night air smelled like gunpowder. John's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He wasn't running. He was hunting. The fire spreads from the street. Royce heard the gunshots. He exhaled, shaking his head. He's better than I thought. The remaining men were on edge now. John wasn't hiding. He was taking them out one by one. Royce smirked. "All right, old man," he muttered. "Let's see what else you've got." He reached into his coat, pulling out a flare gun, aimed it toward the roof of the grocery store. Then he fired. The flare ignited instantly, setting the rooftop on fire. If they couldn't flush him out, they would burn him out. John Carter's decision. John turned, seeing the glow from above, his home, his store, the place he built with his own hands, burning. His jaw clenched. He could let this go. He could run. He could disappear into the night, leave the city behind. But then, he thought of Blackwell. He thought of Vance. He thought of every man who thought they could control the world through fear. And he made his choice. John Carter wasn't going anywhere. They were. and he was going to make damn sure they never forgot his name. The next move. The fire spread, illuminating the battlefield in an eerie orange glow. John reloaded his pistol, checked his knife. Then, he stepped out into the street. No more hiding, no more waiting. It was time to finish this. Royce saw him, smirked, and finally he said, "Now this is gonna be fun." The night erupted into war. Chapter 5. The Fire and the Fury. The flames roared behind John Carter, licking the night sky, casting his shadow long across the street. The mercenaries hesitated. They weren't dealing with a store owner anymore. They were staring at a man who had walked through war and never lost. John Carter rolled his shoulders, his grip tightening around the M1911 pistol. He had fought for his country. Now he was fighting for his home, and the only way this ended was with every last one of these bastards in the ground. The first move. Royce smirked. "You got guts, old man." John didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't hesitate. He raised the pistol. Bang! The first mercenary dropped instantly, a hole between his eyes before he could even react. Chaos erupted. Bullets ripped through the air. John dived for cover, sliding behind a rusted-out pickup truck, reloading in less than 2 seconds. His heartbeat never spiked. His mind never wavered. This was his element. And these men, they were already dead. The night devours them. The mercenaries spread out, trying to flank. John saw it coming. He grabbed a glass bottle, stuffing a rag into the neck. A quick flick of his lighter. Whoosh! The Molotov ignited. John stood, launched it at the SUV. Boom! The explosion rocked the street, the vehicle engulfed in flames, sending 2 of the mercs sprawling. One tried to crawl away. John put 2 rounds in his back. 6 left. The art of war. Royce took cover behind a mailbox, his eyes narrowing. This wasn't right. His men should have had control. Instead, they were being hunted by one damn man. He grit his teeth. Enough games. He pulled out his radio. "Bring in the heavy." Static. Then, "Roger that. ETA 60 seconds. Royce grinned. "Let's see Carter handle this." The air shakes John's ears caught it first. A low hum in the distance. Then, the roar of an engine, a second SUV, a damn minigun mounted on top. John's face stayed blank. He expected this. The SUV skidded to a stop, the gunner locking on. Bullets shredded the street, ripping through cars, storefronts, anything in their way. John barely made it behind cover. He was outgunned, outnumbered. Perfect. The counterattack. John moved, not away, toward, right at them. He zigzagged between cover, bullets whizzing past, his focus razor sharp. He reached his target, the fire hydrant. A single bullet cracked it open, sending a geyser of water spraying into the air. The gunner hesitated, vision blurred. John didn't. He popped up, took a single perfect shot. Bang! The gunner's head snapped back, blood misting into the night. The body slumped over the turret. John didn't stop, didn't slow. He sprinted for the SUV, sliding across the hood like it was second nature. Inside, the driver barely had time to scream before John ripped open the door, grabbed his collar, and slammed his skull into the dashboard. The man went limp. John took the wheel and turned the mounted minigun around, right at the remaining mercenaries. Payback. Royce saw it happen too late. John opened fire. The mercenaries had no chance. Their bodies ripped apart, the sheer force of the bullets throwing them against the pavement like rag dolls. Blood, limbs, screams, and then silence. The street was littered with bodies. The fight was over. Only 2 men remained standing, John Carter and Royce. The last man breathing. Royce lowered his weapon. He was smart enough to know when he had lost. He stepped forward, his hands raised slightly. "All right," he muttered. "You made your point." John didn't blink, didn't lower the gun. Royce smirked. "You think you won?" A slow chuckle. "You don't even know who Blackwell really is, do you?" John stepped closer. Royce's grin widened. "You think this was the end?" "No, Carter." His voice was almost amused. "This was just the beginning." John pulled the trigger. Bang! Royce's body hit the pavement. His laughter died. John exhaled. And finally, the street went quiet. The aftermath. The fire still burned behind him. The city lights flickered. John Carter stood there, breathing slowly, feeling the familiar weight of battle settle into his bones. And for the first time in a long time, he felt alive. But Royce's words lingered. This wasn't the end. Blackwell was still out there. And the war, it was just beginning. John holstered his pistol, stepping over the bodies, already planning his next move. Because if Blackwell wanted a war, he had just picked the wrong damn man to start it with. Chapter 6. A name that shakes the city. The battlefield was silent. Only the distant sound of sirens, the crackle of fire, and the scent of blood in the air remained. John Carter stood motionless, staring down at Royce's corpse. The bastard had died smiling, because he knew something. Something John didn't. And if there was one thing John Carter hated, it was not knowing who his real enemy was. The weight of war. John exhaled, his breath slow and controlled. His muscles were tight, his instincts still sharp, scanning every corner of the destroyed street. The neighborhood was too quiet now. The fight was over. But the war, that was just getting started. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. John clenched his jaw. The timing was too perfect. He answered. No words at first. Then, a voice. Calm, steady, too confident. "Mr. Carter, you've been busy tonight." John's fingers tightened around the phone. He didn't recognize the voice, but he recognized the tone. It was a man used to commanding people, a man who expected obedience. John's voice came out low, steady. "Who the hell are you?" A small chuckle on the other end. "You already know my name, John. Royce mentioned it before you put him down." A pause, then, "Blackwell." John's pulse didn't spike, didn't falter. He just exhaled through his nose. So, this was him. The man behind the mercenaries. The man who sent thugs into his store. The man who just lost a lot of money and a lot of men tonight. John's grip on the phone tightened. "You sent those men," he said. Blackwell chuckled again. "Of course I did. And from what I hear, you handled them efficiently." A pause, then his voice darkened. "But you made a mistake." John didn't speak, didn't take the bait. Blackwell exhaled slowly, as if amused. "You should have stayed retired, Carter." John's jaw clenched. Blackwell continued. "Now I have to clean up this mess. You know how that works, don't you? Loose ends, unfinished business." The air felt heavier. John's eyes narrowed. Then, Blackwell said something that made the world go still. "You're not the only one I sent men after tonight." John's heart stopped, just for a fraction of a second. Then it started racing. Blackwell's voice was soft now, almost mocking. "I hope she's okay, John." John moved before he even thought. The phone hit the pavement. His boots thundered against the ground. His mind was already ahead of his body, already racing home. Because Blackwell wasn't just coming for him. He was coming for Sophia, a home in danger. Sophia Carter had always been strong. She grew up knowing who her father was, not the old store owner the neighborhood respected, the warrior, the soldier, the man who didn't lose. And because of that, she had always known one thing. Trouble was never far behind. That's why when the first man stepped onto the porch, she already had a loaded shotgun aimed at the door. The second they broke in, she was ready. The first shot. The door exploded inward, splinters flying. Sophia pulled the trigger, boom! The closest mercenary took the full blast to the chest, his body thrown back against the porch railing. The others scattered, ducking for cover. Son of a... boom! Sophia fired again, shattering the kitchen window, forcing them to rethink their approach. She grabbed her second clip, reloading with smooth efficiency. Then, a voice, low, cold. Sophia Carter. Her stomach twisted. The man standing at the broken doorway was different, dressed in a black tactical suit, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. A true soldier, not just another mercenary. Sophia aimed at his chest. "You got 5 seconds to turn around, buddy." The man smirked. "You're your father's daughter, all right?" Sophia's trigger finger tightened. Then, a gunshot cracked, but it wasn't hers. The bullet whizzed past her ear, embedding itself in the wall behind her. A sniper. Sophia ducked instantly, rolling behind the kitchen counter. Too many, too fast. She wasn't John Carter. She couldn't win this fight alone. She needed him. The storm arrives. The roar of an engine split through the night. A black SUV came flying down the road, barely slowing before it drifted into the front yard. Before the dust even settled, John Carter was already out of the car, gun raised, eyes burning, and ready to end this. The men on the porch turned. Too slow. John fired first. Bang! The first man dropped instantly, blood misting the doorway. Sophia popped up, taking out the second. The remaining mercenaries hesitated. John used it. He rushed them. The monster unleashed. John Carter moved like a ghost. His knife flashed in the dark. One throat opened, blood spraying. Another man tried to block. John shattered his arm with a single strike, spun behind him, and snapped his neck. The last man standing ran. John let him, because this was a message. Blackwell wanted to play games. John just raised the stakes. The aftermath. Sophia's hands were shaking. John placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, just stared at him. "You knew this was coming," she muttered. John sighed. "Yeah." Sophia exhaled, looking at the bodies around them. "What now?" John stared at the blood-stained porch, at the ruined front door, then at the city skyline in the distance. "I end it." Sophia frowned. John's eyes burned. "I'm going after Blackwell." And this time, he wasn't coming back until the job was done. Chapter 7. A dead man walking the night had turned to blood. John Carter stood outside his destroyed home, breathing deep, steadying the storm inside him. Blackwell had crossed a line. Attacking his store was one thing. Coming after his daughter, that was a death sentence. John wasn't just going after Blackwell. He was going to bury him. The final hunt begins. Sophia watched her father closely. She had never seen him like this before. Not just angry, not just ready for a fight, but determined, like a man who had already decided how this would end. And that scared her more than anything. "Dad," she started. John turned to her, voice calm. "You stay here. Lock up. I'll be back." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm just going to sit here while you go off on a suicide mission?" John's gaze hardened. "This isn't your fight, Sophia." Sophia stepped closer, fists clenched. "You think I give a damn? They came after me too, Dad. I'm not just going to wait around for them to try again." John exhaled. "That's why I'm ending this. Tonight." Sophia's jaw tightened. Then, John pulled something from his pocket. A burner phone. "If anything happens," he said, pressing it into her hands, "you call this number." Sophia frowned. "Who is it?" John didn't answer, just turned, walking to his car. "Stay inside, Sophia." And then, he was gone. A meeting with death. John drove without hesitation. He wasn't looking for Blackwell. He already knew where he was. Because men like Blackwell, they were too arrogant to hide. They liked being found. John pulled up to an abandoned warehouse on the docks, the type of place where men like Blackwell did business. He stepped out, unarmed, not because he wasn't ready for a fight, but because he wanted Blackwell to know one thing. John Carter wasn't afraid. The warehouse doors were wide open. Inside, a group of men stood waiting, and at the center of them, Blackwell, dressed in an expensive suit, sipping whiskey like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw John, he smirked. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, "you made good time." John stopped 10 feet away, voice cold. "Call your men off, let's talk." Blackwell chuckled. "You killed quite a few of my people tonight." They had it coming. Blackwell exhaled, shaking his head. You're a relic, Carter. A dinosaur. You really think this is going to go the way you want? John didn't blink. You touched my daughter. Blackwell smiled. And that was his mistake. John moved before anyone could react. The slaughter begins. John Carter wasn't just fast, he was unstoppable. 1 second, standing still. The next, his hands were wrapped around the closest man's wrist, twisting the gun out of his grip. Crack! A swift elbow to the jaw sent the man crumpling. John turned the stolen gun, fired 2 rounds. Bang! Bang! 2 more men dropped. The others scrambled, drawing their weapons. But John was already moving. The next man lunged. John sidestepped, grabbed him by the collar. Snap! His knee met the man's nose, shattering it instantly. Gunfire roared. John ducked behind a pillar, reloading the stolen weapon. 5 men left, then 4, then 3. Then Blackwell ran. The final chase. John saw him dart through a back door. Coward. He dropped the empty gun, grabbing one from a fallen mercenary and pushed forward. The warehouse led to the docks where a black SUV was already waiting. Blackwell sprinted for the car. John raised the gun, fired. The back tire exploded. Blackwell stumbled, cursing. John closed the distance. You don't get to walk away, he growled. Blackwell whirled, raising a small pistol. John was faster. Bang! The bullet ripped through Blackwell's knee, dropping him instantly. He screamed, clutching the wound, his expensive suit now stained red. John loomed over him, gaze empty. This is what happens, he said, when you threaten my family. Blackwell laughed through the pain. You think killing me changes anything? John crouched, pressing the barrel of his gun against Blackwell's forehead. It ends with you. Blackwell chuckled, then through gritted teeth. That's where you're wrong, Carter. John's finger tightened on the trigger. And then his phone rang. He froze. Slowly he pulled it out. It was Sophia's number. His stomach dropped. He answered. Sophia. Silence. Then a voice that wasn't hers. Mr. Carter, the voice said smoothly, if you want your daughter back, you'll listen very carefully. John's blood ran cold. Blackwell smiled through bloody teeth. John pressed the gun harder against his skull. You son of a... The voice cut him off. You kill Blackwell, she dies. John's breath hitched. His finger hesitated on the trigger. Because now, this wasn't just about revenge. It was about saving his daughter. Chapter 8. A War on Two Fronts. John Carter stood motionless, his gun pressed against Blackwell's bleeding head. The phone in his hand buzzed, the voice on the other end calm. If you kill him, she dies. His stomach twisted. His finger trembled on the trigger. He had every reason to pull it. But Sophia, she was all that mattered. John exhaled slowly. His heart pounded like war drums. The old soldier in him wanted blood, but the father in him, the father couldn't risk it, not yet. Where is she? He demanded. The voice chuckled. You'll find out soon enough. Then the line went dead. A deal with the devil. John clenched his jaw, staring at Blackwell. The bastard was grinning through his pain. Looks like you need me now, Blackwell rasped, blood dripping down his lips. John tightened his grip on the gun. Every fiber of his being screamed to pull the trigger, but that wouldn't bring Sophia back. He needed leverage, he needed Blackwell alive. John exhaled, then he lowered the gun, not out of mercy, out of necessity. Blackwell's smirk widened. Smart man, he wheezed. John punched him, hard. Blackwell's head snapped back against the pavement and he groaned, dazed. John pulled out his phone, dialed the burner number he had given Sophia. This time, someone picked up immediately. Not Sophia. A man. We've been expecting your call, Mr. Carter, the voice said. John's hands curled into fists. If you hurt her, I'll... Relax, the man interrupted. She's alive. For now. John's blood boiled. What do you want? The man's voice was smooth, almost amused. A trade. John's jaw tightened. You want Blackwell? A chuckle. Of course. John glanced at the bleeding man at his feet, then back at the phone. When? Tomorrow night, midnight. You bring him alone. We make the exchange. John's mind raced. This was a trap, but he had no choice. Sophia's life was on the line. Fine, he said, and the line went dead. A plan for the impossible Jack was waiting when John returned. One look at his old friend's face, and Jack knew. This isn't over. John set Blackwell down in a chair, tying his hands behind his back. Jack lit a cigarette. Where's Sophia? They took her, John said, voice cold. Jack's expression hardened. When's the meet? Midnight, tomorrow. Jack took a long drag. How many guys? Doesn't matter, John said. Jack exhaled smoke, nodding. Damn right it doesn't. The night of reckoning. John drove alone to the meeting point, a deserted parking lot, dimly lit by flickering streetlights. The air was thick with tension. He stepped out, dragging Blackwell behind him. Across the lot, 3 SUVs sat waiting, engines running, shadows moved inside. Then, a door opened. A man stepped out, tall, cold, a professional killer, and beside him, Sophia. Her wrists were tied, her face was bruised, but she was alive. John's grip tightened. The man smiled. Mr. Carter, he greeted. John didn't respond. He pushed Blackwell forward. Let her go. The man chuckled. So eager. He snapped his fingers. One of his men untied Sophia. She stumbled forward, her eyes locking onto John's. Dad. John exhaled, feeling a weight lift off his chest. Go, baby, he murmured. Sophia ran toward him. John's arms wrapped around her, his heart pounding. Then, gunfire erupted, betrayal and bloodshed. John shoved Sophia to the ground as bullets tore through the air. Blackwell was dead before he could scream, riddled with bullets from his own men. Jack's voice boomed from the distance. John, get down! Boom! An explosion rocked the parking lot. Jack had arrived, and he brought hell with him. John grabbed Sophia, dragging her behind cover. Gunfire lit up the night. Jack's truck skidded into view, doors flying open. More men poured out, hired mercs John had called in. A full-blown war erupted in the parking lot. John grabbed a fallen gun, and the soldier inside him awakened. The final kill. John moved like a ghost through the chaos. One by one, the enemy fell beneath his bullets. Jack fought beside him, covering his 6. The leader, the man who had taken Sophia, tried to run. John saw him, chased him, caught him. The man whirled, raising his gun. John was faster. Bang! The bullet tore through the man's chest. He crumpled, gasping for breath. John stood over him, gun smoking. You should have killed me first, he murmured. Then, he finished it. The aftermath. The sun was rising. Sophia sat in the back of Jack's truck, wrapped in a blanket. She was safe. John stood beside her, bloodied, exhausted. Jack tossed him a beer. That was messy, he muttered. John smirked. But we won. Jack clinked his bottle against John's. Yeah, we did. Sophia looked up at her father. What now? John exhaled, looked out at the horizon, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. Now, he wrapped an arm around his daughter. Now, we go home. What would you have done if they came for your home? If they took what you loved? Would you fight? Would you run? Or would you make them regret it? Drop a comment below. Tell me what you would do. And if you made it this far, smash that like button. Because stories like this, they remind us what it means to protect what's ours. Subscribe now, because next time, the war might be even bigger.